Hello. In not the last video, but a two-part video, which gives you a different perception on as above, so below, and as within, so without. I said that the next video was going to prove the Archaix data from a different perspective, something I have an interest in and something I have maybe a slightly greater knowledge than the average person. But before we get on to that, I have to share this little thing with you from today. And that is, I had the radio on, I had music by two of the giants of what most people would call the classical genre of music, what I call serious music or real music. And that was pieces by George Frederick Handel and Johann Sebastian Bach. And a magical thing happened which basically follows on from this magic from yesterday, which I shared in the previous video. The magic continued today in that Rosie jumped down off the shelf onto my lap. And I said to Rosie, "How nice of you to drop in." Rosie is a very traumatized cat and generally will growl and hiss at the other cats if they come in close proximity. But Zibby, who is a gentle giant and a gentleman, also came and sat on my lap, and they were actually in bodily contact. And Rosie didn't get up and walk away. She stayed on my lap, so I had the two cats on my lap. And what I found really amusing that then came on the radio was Rossini's Cats duet. As Yolanda on True Love Channel says, this is an interactive reality and you will be given signs and it can come through the radio. And I feel that was a beautiful confirmation with that Cats duet, as I have two cats then sitting on my lap. Currently I have Misha sitting on my lap, this little black one. Now you can meet all 6 cats on my secondary channel, Varnfried Cat Sanctuary. The link is in the description to this video. Now generally I don't bother looking in the mirror. I don't do anything to my hair or my beard, but it struck me as I've caught sight of this physical body how I resemble Johannes Brahms, a German composer born in 1833. Why do I mention this? Well, Archaix veterans will know the significance of that. It is the midpoint between two Phoenix events of 1764 and 1902. 1833 figures in another way as well. So we come on to the topic proper, as it were, of this video. To take what Archaix channel has shown and give you further confirmation that time is not linear, but is actually cyclical. What that means is you will have an epicentral year, which is the sort of midpoint marker. An equidistance of that, you will have similar events playing out. So I thought, what better than to look at the composer Richard Wagner, because I share the same birthday, May the 22nd, obviously not the same year. Both Wagner and the Austrian composer Anton Bruckner are very close to my heart. Actually, all the composers that I mention in this video are very close to my heart. Significant about Bruckner is that 90 years, less 144 days, separates his passing from this physical world to my arrival in this physical world. So I find that interesting in itself. So let's look at Wagner. And there are two epicenters with any composers. One is their lifespan, and secondly is the lifespan of their composing period. So Richard Wagner was born on the 22nd of May 1813 in Leipzig and died in Venice on the 13th of February 1883. So his midlife year was 1848. That is a hugely significant year for several reasons. Firstly, it was the year of the Dresden Uprising, when Europe was going through turmoil and basically sort of communist uprisings. And clearly Wagner learnt a lot from that with what followed. Now, 1848, Wagner was implicated in this Dresden uprising, and had he not fled initially to Paris and then exiled to Switzerland, he no doubt would have met the same fate. Oh, excuse me, the piece of paper is just blown away. I'll just go and get that. Yeah, so had Wagner been arrested, he would have no doubt met the same fate as the other two instigators in that Dresden uprising, being August Rokel and Mikhail Bakunin, both of Jewish origin. So what you have is potentially what would have been the death of a composer. Now, if we go to the year 1847, that is the year that the Jewish composer Felix Mendelssohn died. If we go to 1849, that is the death of the Polish composer Frédéric Chopin. That is a repeat cycle, because this very year, 2026, marks the 200th death bicentenary of the composer Carl Maria von Weber. Next year marks the 200th death bicentenary of Ludwig van Beethoven, and the year after that, 2028, marks the 200th death bicentenary of the composer Franz Schubert. So you've got three composers there, a trio of deaths, one year after another. But now if we go back 17 years prior to that, you have the birth of the Jewish composer Felix Mendelssohn in 1809, followed by Frédéric Chopin in 1810, and then Franz Liszt in 1811. So Wagner's midlife marker year is 1848, but his composing midpoint year is 1854, because he started composing in 1826 when he would have been about 13 years old. Now, what is interesting with Wagner, who was greatly influenced by Beethoven and Carl Maria von Weber, is that he took opera and turned it into music drama. So if we look at his outputs in that sphere, what you have is what I would class as the early operas, these being Die Feen, written between 1833 and 1835, which means the fairies, followed by Das Liebesverbot, the ban on love, based on Shakespeare's Measure for Measure. And then, I hope I've pronounced this correctly, Rienzi, Last of the Tribunes, between 1837 and 1840. With Die Feen, he very much emulates the composing style of Carl Maria von Weber. With Das Liebesverbot, it is more in the style of an Italian opera, and Renzi is more in the style of Italian grand opera. So Wagner is like finding his own voice with these early operas. So you have a trio of operas there. Now we come to the year 1840, and you have what a trio of mature operas. These being The Flying Dutchman, Tannhäuser, and Lohengrin. Next we have at the epicenter of his composing period, where he has crafted the music drama, which is the synthesis to create the total artwork, because it is not just about composing the music. He writes his own librettos, he gives stage instructions. The Ring Cycle was written over a 25-year period and consists of 4 dramas, these being Das Rheingold, Die Walküre, the Valkyries, which most of you will probably have heard, that famous theme, da 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 da. That's the best I could do. That is then followed by Siegfried, and finally Götterdämmerung, which is the Twilight of the Gods. He's also begins work on his late music dramas, these being Die Meistersinger, which he started composing in 1845 and actually finished in 1867. Then you have Tristan and Isolde, which he begins writing in his composing midpoint year of 1854 and completes in 1859. And overlapping that, his final music drama, Parsifal, which he starts writing in about 1858 and completes in 1882. Now, what is interesting, either side of the 4-evening epic of the Ring Cycle, when we look at The Flying Dutchman, Tannhäuser and Lohengrin, you have a reflection in those late dramas, in that The Flying Dutchman and Tristan and Isolde has a theme which very much has ocean-going ships involved in it. Tannhäuser and the Master Singers of Nuremberg are both very much about minstrels and song contests. And then finally, Lohengrin is mirrored with Parsifal, in which their story is based on the Grail legends and the Grail Knights. So you've got this isometric marker in the Ring Cycle. Now I'd invite all of you to really look into these music dramas of Wagner from an esoteric standpoint and what they reveal. Effectively, what you could say is that the Ring Cycle is like a very condensed version of the same story that is given in the Bible, when it is also read from an esoteric viewpoint as an internal story. So what else do we need to cover here? There's so much more to this. So you'll also find there are patterns, repeating cycles. So the year that Carl Maria Weber was born, 1786, is an isometric midpoint between the death of Wilhelm Friedemann Bach and Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, 2 of Johann Sebastian Bach's sons who were composers. The first dying in 1784, the second dying in 1788, and both were 74 years old. Now, one of the other brothers lived to the age of 47. So you have 2 that lived to the age of 74 and 1 that lives to the age of 47. So the numerics and things are incredible with this. When we also look at Mozart, He was born in 1756, 8 years before the 1764 Phoenix event, the very year that Mozart began composing his first symphony at the age of 8. If we go 8 years the other side of 1764, we come to the year 1772. Now, Ludwig van Beethoven was actually born in 1770, but for the majority of his life, he believed that he was born in 1772. This is due to his father somehow managing to erase his baptism record, because there is not a definite date for the birth of Beethoven, but it is most likely around the 14th or 15th of December 1770. So you have that isometric marker of 1764 and two of the greatest composers, one born 8 years before 1764 and the other one believing that he was born 8 years after. Remember that these cyclical time loops are similar events. Now, if we return to that topic of the Dresden Uprising of 1848, just go forward 54 years and you will come to 1902. So you've got the Dresden Uprising. It was basically in Central Europe and it was crushed. Now, if we go 54 years forward from 1902, we come to the 1956 Hungarian Uprising, a similar event in a similar area with a similar result. It was crushed by the authorities. I could just go off on so many more tangents on this, but I don't want to give you an overload of information. But I took what Archaix was showing and thought, let's put this to the test outside of what Archaix is showing, and let's see if this pattern does exist elsewhere. And this is, to me, the confirmation. But if I've not only done this with the composer Richard Wagner, I've also looked at the life of Ludwig van Beethoven and the composer Anton Bruckner and found exactly the same results. As an example of this, the epicenter of Anton Bruckner's life is 1859. In that year and 1858 and also 1860, he composed no music whatsoever because he was going through a study period. And these same patterns will just keep coming out over and over again. Also, another name that is often mentioned, but his music is not very well known these days, is the composer Carl Czerny, who was a pupil of Beethoven and then a tutor to Franz Liszt. And he was born in 1791, the same year that Mozart dies. He lives until 1857. That's the year after the death of the composer Robert Schumann. So no doubt if I did a little bit more investigation, I would find yet another trio of deaths or births of what are classed as great composers. So you have this looping time pattern, which is being reflected when you look at the lives of these great composers. And I would suggest that you could do this with other artists, be them painters and sculptors, with their creative period and their lifespan. And you can find isometric markers with an epicenter year. So I hope that has made the case even further and giving more confirmation data that what Archaix channel is showing through Jason Breshears is absolutely true. So I have no doubt, remember in the legal system, things have to be proven beyond reasonable doubt. And I feel just looking at this information and doing exactly the same as Jason Breshears has said many times, you do it with a calculator. So you take a year and then subtract a previous year and then you get the number of years in between. And then you can find these isometric markers from this. So I hope I have further made a confirmation case from a slightly different perspective, but just further confirms exactly what Archaix is showing. And also, as I mentioned near the start of this video, what Yolanda is showing on True Love channel, that the external world will give you all kinds of signs during the day, and the radio and the television can definitely communicate with you, and certainly with music. When you go beyond the superficial and don't just have it on as background, and you really listen as if you're going into a ceremony, and you really feel the movement, the music. And when something strikes a chord in that music, consider where you feel that in the body. This ties into the chakra system. So if we take the 7 chakras and we consider A as being the crown and G as being the root, or the other way round, it will always come out is D is the heart chakra, and certainly D minor is a hugely significant key for me personally, thinking of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in the key of D minor, which actually happened to come on the radio today as well. Also, Bruckner's Ninth Symphony is in the key of D minor, as is his Third Symphony, which is dedicated to Richard Wagner and is known as the Wagner Symphony because it quotes themes from Wagner's earlier works. And they really do hit home. Bruckner, to me, is the one composer that really communicates, probably slightly more so than Richard Wagner. But there is a wealth to be discovered when you really go in and feel the music, cut out all the outside distractions, you immerse yourself into this. And it's just phenomenal what will come out. And it is also phenomenal what comes out that goes to show that time is not linear, but is cyclical. But it does have a linear aspect in that as one composer is born, another one dies, or one is born in the midlife point of another composer. And of course, with each successive generations of composers, it is about breaking pattern, going in a new direction, taking music in a new way. Just compare those early symphonies of C.P.E. Bach, which are usually around 10 minutes long. And then we come to someone like Beethoven with his Third Symphony, the Eroica, how that broke the mold. And the slow movement alone is around 30 minutes. And then we move on to, say, Anton Bruckner, and his later symphonies are getting on for an hour and 20 minutes, or even an hour and a half. But there is so much that you can find in this. But it also begs the question, why are there not the great composers today? Why do we not have this creativity? That is going to be a subject of a future video, because all these videos that I'm making is going to address that question of why are there not the prolific number of geniuses in the world today that are emerging. That's not to say that there aren't geniuses in this world, and I would certainly number among those, and I hope it doesn't embarrass them, but I would certainly class as a genius Yolanda Beasley from True Love channel, Lana A. Labonte on her channel, and Jason Breshears, and also Niven with his channel, as just 4 examples. So with that, I'm going to say unconditional love to you all. I will put a link in the description to my Vab Art Productions channel, because there is something visionary and very much a foretelling that Wagner wrote subsequent to that Dresden uprising and those Jewish co-conspirators, called Judaism in Music. It if it is at all mentioned, it is never quoted. But I have read that entire essay and the two follow-up essays, which are titled More Commentary on Judaism and Music in 1869, which was followed by a third essay called Modern in 1878. That very much shows the way music has gone subsequent to when Wagner has written those, how art has been turned, to quote Wagner, into bric-a-brac with a financial value rather than a true value of the art itself. What is also interesting reading these three works, it shows that during the 19th century and up to the time of the Russian Revolution, the press in Russia was not a captured operation. So I'll leave you with that. I will put the link to the playlist where you can hear the audio readings of these three essays of Wagner. Make your mind up for yourself. I just read what is written. It's just a straight reading. There is a visual of this landscape, but that is really just irrelevant. It is more just listen with your eyes shut and judge it for yourself. Was he right? What Wagner showed, has it come true? Because I feel it has. It is significant as a part of answering why we do not have this prolific number of geniuses in this reality today, as we did have in the 18th and 19th century. So with that, we've now got up to, I can hardly see the screen here, 27 minutes. That's a good time to stop. 27 being a 9, which is a completion number. So with that, I will say unconditional love to you all.